I've always been very uncomfortable and, to be quite frank with you, completely grossed out by hormones and puberty, even as an adult. Even as they continue to affect my life and change as I get older, they still completely disgust me. And it's funny growing up I was born in the 70s, of course, so going through puberty in the 80s, actually for me, I didn't get my boobs or even weigh over 100 pounds until the early 90s when I went away to school. And it wasn't in a gorgeous model thin runway way. It was in an awkward, underdeveloped, extremely unattractive way. But puberty was different and it was really gross because we didn't have access to information. So whatever information you were getting about your hormones or the changes your body was going through, it was coming from your parents. So depending on how your parents shared the information and what kind of information they were sharing was sort of your education. And then of course the sex ed part came from at one day at elementary school. And if I'm remembering correctly, they separated the boys from the girls and then told you in what probably seemed like 4 hours because it was so awkward having a teacher have to explain this stuff. And then you're watching some terrible movie that was done in the 70s describing certain things and events that were going to happen or would be happening to some at that time. You watch this for a couple of hours, and that was about it. Some of us were a little more resourceful and got a little bit more of a Hollywood element. If you could find the Playboy channel, we all knew what channel that was on, at least myself and my peers. Now, my parents didn't invest in that. We didn't have it, but you could switch the channels quick enough or in a timely fashion enough. There was just a real art to it where it would kind of delete the squiggly lines. Otherwise, it came in with squiggly lines so you couldn't see, you could hear what was going on, but you couldn't see it. And that was sort of the access to porn at the time. And that was where I got some of my education. And with that said, though, there was always a naughty element because if you're watching the Playboy station, or in my case, there was a time we had gone to a hotel and I stayed up past the family's bedtime and sat and watched porn. And then when we went to check out of the hotel, my mom had quite the bill because it was all pay-per-view, which I had no idea. I got in a lot of trouble for that. But that being said, the way I grew up and the information I was given, there was just a little bit of a naughty element. And so there was something about it. And probably because I was so awkward, it was just gross and it was ugly because we didn't have the filters. We didn't have it. If you took a selfie, it meant you took a whole roll of film and you might get one eyeball or because you didn't quite know what you were taking pictures of, but you certainly couldn't make yourself look good in the picture. So it was just an awkward, awful time in my life. I'm Nikki Lynn Chase, and this is my podcast, Adult Chicken, and it's about navigating life's unexpected, my journey, our stories, raising two special needs kids as a single mom. When I had kids, I never even imagined them going through puberty. I never wanted to imagine that. I didn't think about becoming adolescents and going through all the hormonal stages and craziness of life. I only really ever pictured and allowed myself to picture the exciting events, how we would celebrate monumental times or go through phases and hit the next phases of our lives. And of course, our phases were relatively different from everybody else's, and the progression was so different that I just really had the unintentional treat of living in the moment because I just didn't know how long these moments would last. And some felt like they lasted forever. Some just went by. I think, like every parent, things you want to hold on, you want to preserve some of the moments. You want to preserve them being, like a puppy. You don't want certain phases to ever end because they're so darn cute. But then, like potty training, you want them to get beyond that. You want them to progress. So having avoided the reality that we would eventually go through puberty and adolescence and all of the ugliness and awkwardness that goes with it, I hadn't thought much about it, except I had constantly reflected just for safety reasons and because I was so nervous about it. I had reflected a lot on when I had taught school, when I had taught 9 and 10-year-old special ed severely handicapped kids, because what had been the most prominent point that had been made to me, or the thing that I had learned that I had never thought about that scared the absolute bejesus out of me, was I was told never let these kids go to the bathroom by themselves or go anywhere for that matter on campus together and by themselves. There should always be an adult, a teacher, or a teacher's aide. And they made it real clear it was because a lot of these kids have heightened hormones and they were all intellectually disabled. And the problem was they don't have the capacity to understand. I mean, they're horny 9 and 10-year-olds. And again, a lot of them had already gone through puberty. A lot of them were going through puberty, and they don't have the wheelhouse or the capacity to understand the ramifications or what could potentially happen. So it was something we had to be very, very aware of. And oh my goodness, it just struck me, and it was so frightening to me. And I thought, God, kids are so vulnerable. And then you've got these kids who don't have the capacity to understand any of this, and yet they've got these hormones that are just all over the place, like a typical teenager or typical kid their age. And that terrified me, and that stuck with me. And that was something I made sure I just constantly had in the back of my mind when I had my own kids, not knowing that they were going to be special needs. So the fact that my kids are special needs, I felt like I had an advantage. Like we wouldn't really have to go through the terribly awkward. I knew from that sort of education, teaching, that I needed to be wary and careful, and of course be an advocate, make sure that they were safe and just proactive and diligent. And I started feeling like I was one of the lucky ones, and that since my kids were both special needs, we wouldn't really have to go through that ugly, awkward, hormonal puberty challenging time of an adolescent or a teenager. And then we started Special Olympics. Well, before Special Olympics, I started seeing the kids in Bootsy's class changing. But I'm like, it's not going to happen to us. We don't have to go through that. It's very different with a special needs kid because it's not different in that it's the same shit's going on, hormones, puberty, all of it. But what's different is cognitively. They're at such a different place. And with where Bootsy was placed in the school, the kids are much lower, right? So they seem like toddlers, and then it just looks weird because they're going through puberty. But she was such a late bloomer, and as is Sandler, that they kind of matched up. Their cognitive matched up a little better with where they were at as far as hormones and puberty and development went. However, we start going to Special Olympics. And that's where I start meeting a bunch of parents who have adult kids with special needs. And they start telling stories. It's a very safe place to kind of tell your stories about your kid because we all somewhat understand each other. And this mom starts telling me this story about her son, who I think at the time he was 23, and he's very attracted to Disney princesses. And Disney movies were his porn. And I can't believe I'm even saying this out loud, but it's a very true story. And that terrified me. And she broke down in tears, and she was just explaining how scary it is because the innocence and the inability and the incapacity to understand right from wrong was terrifying to her. And it sounds crazy, but in reality, it's just a whole different set of problems for people who have kids with special needs and have the hormones and all this stuff, because now you've got all this stuff combined, but it's not really going in any sort of direction that makes sense, if you will, for lack of a better way to say it. So it almost makes it this confusing time in a kid's life. It seems to be extended, and then they don't know what to do with themselves, right? They don't know what's appropriate, when it's appropriate, or how to be appropriate. And that added a whole new element of fright and concern to my life, thinking, oh my God, like we do have to address these things. And I might have to get somewhere, somehow, more creative than buying books written for 4-year-olds. So we get in the car that same day of Special Olympics to drive home. And I've got, of course, the whole crew from our neck of the woods, and I'm driving everybody home. And the one boy who we'd known him since about the second grade is in the front seat, and all of a sudden it just starts yanking his chain. and I'm on the freeway and I'm so startled. I'm lucky I didn't wreck the car, but I'm so disgusted, so startled, so it's so in my face, literally and figuratively speaking. And I'm thinking, my God, universe, I got it. I get it. I've got to address the fact that we've got to give my kids some sort of education. And I've got to understand that this is going to happen to us. I never drove another kid unless I had to in my car again. I was so grossed out, disturbed, and uncomfortable with what had happened in the car. And I think shortly after that, we didn't go to another Special Olympics. It was just overload. I couldn't believe that not only did I have all the other challenges that came with being special needs, but my God, I wasn't getting out of this puberty thing. I wasn't getting out of this adolescent awkward craziness. In fact, it was going to be tenfold. Well, Bootsy ended up going through more or less her puberty and her growth spurt during COVID, which was the perfect time. If ever we had to go through it, thank God it was then. It was kind of, we were on lockdown. All of a sudden, she'd grown a foot. I was looking up at her when it was time to discipline her, and that was weird. We returned from COVID. Everybody that Sandler had skated with, who was a boy before COVID, all of a sudden had turned into a man, facial hair, another foot taller, deep voices, and it was crazy. But time was so wonky at that point. Nothing made sense. I don't even know where the 2 years went, but people had gone from kid to grown up in a matter of the 2 years or year and a half. Well, then it's time that Sandler he's quickly approaching 15, and I take him in for his annual well check. And his pediatrician, who I just absolutely adore, mentions that he thinks we need to get some extra blood work done. He's a little concerned. He shows me his chart, which he's never made. He's never made the chart. He's always been on his own curve, and I'm comfortable with that. But he mentioned it looks like he's fallen off a little bit, which was concerning to him. And I said, that's fair. That's nothing new. That wasn't anything I hadn't heard before. And about a week after the blood work was done, I got a phone call and I missed it. And when I called the pediatrician's office back, they went and got the pediatrician. I knew that was never a good sign. In this day and age, if they go get your provider and they don't make you wait several days to talk to them, there's a problem. He literally was waiting for my call, and he said he wanted to talk to me before the pharmacy got a hold of me, and that he had to go on this hypothyroid medicine immediately. And I didn't like that. I didn't like that. I knew thyroid had to do with hormones. I felt like I'm not a naturalist. I'm not like unlike my mother, who used to go dig up some random roots in the yard and then take it and say it cured everything. I'm not that person, but I don't like to take things if they don't need to be taken. I don't want to mess with hormones. I don't want anything synthetic going in my kid's body or my body unless it has to. He explained it to me, though, that he doesn't exhibit one symptom of this hypothyroid, which means his thyroid does not work, and he should be lethargic. He should be overweight. He should be losing his hair. I mean, the level where his thyroid, I guess, was so profound and crazy and ludicrous that the doctor said he'd been sitting with it, just not understanding it. And I said, well, it is Sandler, so we'll do what we have to do. And he said, you need to get in to see endocrinology immediately. So we go to endocrinology. And I had mentioned this doctor was great. He said we were going to be fast friends. He was very interested in the kids and dove into their history, dove into their chromosomal anomaly. And he said, let's give him 4 months, but we need to see, we'll do a lot more testing. Let's just see if he's got testosterone. Let's see if it's working. Well, that 4 months went so quickly. I felt like we had so long, and I just kept thinking to myself and kind of telling Sandler, let's manifest this. Let's get these hormones up and going. Come on, testosterone, kick in, but not too much, because I love preserving the fact that he's still my little guy. We've been practicing shaving. We've liked the idea of shaving, but I like that it's just been an idea. I like that he's so small. He cognitively so behind. Old soul-wise, he's 1,000 years old, but cognitively, he's so behind that it kind of helps with him not seem so off. Well, we just went back a couple weeks ago, and the endocrinologist said, time's up. He's got to get injections. Sandler and I simultaneously knew exactly what that meant, and we both it just crumpled up inside. It was horrible. I didn't want to hear that he needed hormone shots. He didn't want to hear he needed injections of any kind. All of a sudden, I pictured having this horny, hairy man-child with a mustache who believes in Santa Claus. And it was awful. Selfishly, I just couldn't see it. And I had to do damage control. We immediately went to a skate park that we hadn't been to before, and just to try to get both of our minds off of it. And I just couldn't stop worrying about what that was going to look like. And they said it needed to happen immediately. And I called a friend of mine and I said, I just don't know how to process this. And I was very careful about who I reached out to, but I needed to talk to another mom. And I called a mom who I knew would probably have the right words. And really, I just couldn't believe what I had heard. It seemed like a lot. And it was weird that it even stumped me or surprised me. But I just all of a sudden had to cross that bridge of, holy shit, I guess it is time that he goes through puberty. I'd been having the luxury of preserving his being a boy, a little boy. And we were going to, of course, the image in my head is him turning into the Incredible Hulk and turning green and bursting out of his clothes. And this friend of mine said, Nikki, I get what you're saying. I get that the cognitive, kind of matches up and with his size. And he's so well, embraced by the community and they know him. But with that said, I think because of it being skateboarding that he loves and all the things that he loves to do and the fact that he's getting into swimming so that he can start surfing and all of the things that he loves to do, I think it's going to enhance his ability to do these things. And I thought, thank God I called her, because it was like the careful wording of enhance. And then I was very selective. I will not Google things. I don't like to Google things. I don't like too much information. I don't like other people's or parents' opinions usually. And so I very carefully put in the words that I wanted to use. And it said the same thing, that a lot of times kids, especially ones with chromosome situations, need hormone replacement. And they need these things for bone growth and for all these things that actually will enhance his ability to do things and his ability to continue to grow, which is the most important thing. So I finally digested, processed, and tried to absorb the fact that I was going to potentially have a hairy, horny, mustache-wearing man-child here in the near future, and realized it doesn't matter. He's still going to be the same person. It's not like the hormones are going to replace his soul. It's not like there's a trade-off and he's going to have testosterone and that's going to suck out who he is as a human. He's still going to be the beautiful, amazing human he is. And let's look at it, as this friend told me, as an enhanced version. And he went and got his first shot on Monday, this past Monday. And my God, it cost me a fortune, because I had been so sad and so upset by it. And I knew he was scared and terrified because he heard the word injection. He knew that meant a shot. And I explained as much as I could and as much as I knew about it and the benefits of what it would do for him. And I had to promise that I would take him anywhere he wanted to go for breakfast. And he chose IHOP. And I thought, oh, IHOP, we haven't been there forever and for years. And he got his shot and it went really well. And then we ended up at IHOP, which, my God, pancakes have gotten so darn expensive. I couldn't believe IHOP cost me $50. And I couldn't believe how expensive pancakes were. But after he ate his pancakes, he looked at me and he said, Mommy, is my voice changing? Are my muscles, are they looking really big? And I said, yeah, I don't know if it's the pancakes or that first shot, but you're looking pretty good. And so with all of that said, here we go. Just another stage, another step. And I think I've gotten over my disgust and my disdain for puberty. because it's happening whether I'm ready or whether I'm not. So it's interesting, all this talk about testosterone and hormones and puberty, hairy things and hairy bodies and hairy mustaches and facial hair and voices changing. I started thinking about the irony of my being age old and all of a sudden having to go through a whole hormonal change myself. So today's special edition is about my own hormonal changes. Extra, extra, read all about it. We've got hormone changes, no doubt about it. I tell you what, getting to be age old is an interesting thing. And I refused. I hate the word menopause. I hate it because when my mom went through it, well, for one, she was a drunk and she was on repeat. It's all she'd talk about. And she went through menopause fairly early. We still had a relationship when it happened to her. I was in college and we'd hang out, but it's all she would talk about. Her hot flashes, her roots that she'd dig up in the yard. God knows what she was digging up because she knew nothing about roots. It's not like she was any sort of natural scientist or anything of the sort. She was literally digging up shit in the yard and capsuling it and distributing it to herself and whoever else believed in anything she had to say. But she refused to do any sort of hormone replacement, and all she would do for what felt like years, but it was probably a year, was talk about her hot flashes. And I swore up and down that if and when I ever went through that change, I would never talk about it. Well, about a year ago, I started getting hot flashes. And I was like, oh, son of a bitch, this is it. I'm getting what my mom had. And it almost made me understand why she talked about them so much. I couldn't believe I could go from being just a regular temperature. I'm not real good with temperature and numbers, but I'd say like just an average temperature of maybe say 70 degrees. And all of a sudden it felt like I jumped into a furnace or a sauna, and I'd go from like 70 degrees to 179 degrees in a matter of seconds. And I'd be somewhere and just start sweating. Inevitably, it always happened at 6:30 p.m. And my kids don't have any concept of time. If it's light, it's day. If it's dark, it's nighttime. It doesn't matter what time. But I'd always notice that these hot flashes were coming in at 6:30. And then once in a while, it happened when it wasn't 6:30 p.m., but the kids would start seeing me sweat all of a sudden out of the blue. And they'd go, Mommy, is it 6:30? Is it 6:30? And it took me some time to figure out that that's what they were picking up on. So I guess just know that it's 6:30 somewhere, and it might be time for a hot flash or just a margarita. But all I can ask is remember to be kind, because if some woman you know is all of a sudden sweating profusely, no matter what time of the day it is, she could potentially inside be igniting like a dry Christmas tree. Please tune in next week for what will be possibly a very difficult episode to listen to. But I think it's an important story and part of my life to share. It's all about domestic violence. And it is something I endured. It is something I experienced. It's something I forever have been embarrassed that I was ever privy to the life of being a victim of domestic violence. I actually hate to use the word victim because I feel like I am responsible for making the choice to be with somebody who was a domestic abuser. However, it has made me who I am. It has made me probably stronger. It has made me maybe more understanding of people who go through that. And I would like to share that experience with all of you. So tune in. Again, it might be a hard one to listen to, but I think it's an important one to hear. Please like, follow, subscribe, and share. You can find me at adultchicken.com. Make sure to get the .com in there, or you're going to find a plethora of pictures of adult chickens. You can also find me on Apple and Spotify podcast, as well as YouTube at Adult Chicken for all three. You can also find me on TikTok, which is still a work in progress, and that is adult_chicken, as well as Instagram adult_chicken.